Welcome to the Dr. Truth Show. It's the 30th of June, Wednesday, 2021, and we are in the midst of a good week of complete sadness in Miami Beach. Obviously, most of the world is aware of the unfortunate events in Surfside where a large superstructure collapsed into itself for reasons unknown, and 150 some people have been apparently gone missing in the event, and no one seems to be able to figure out exactly why the building collapsed. But it's quite a sad event, and there's so much that we don't know, and I think for the families we wish them some sort of peace, but unfortunately these things do happen, and we're in the midst of a incredible amount of just morose energy. The sky is gray, it's been raining, lots of things make it seem like brighter days are ahead, so we hope so. So today's topic will be on COVID and the new variant, Delta and Delta Plus. And we'll slightly talk about some other things surrounding what we do know more about vaccination and treatment. So as you've been probably aware of, the COVID saga continues. We are now almost a year and a half into the outbreak, and we still don't seem to have a very good handle on how we're going to get most of the rest of the world vaccinated or protected. There's just not enough vaccine to go around, and we're seeing the issues with the vaccine, which is a separate topic. And then we also have a new variant that probably will continue to mutate, and the Delta, which is the Indian variant, which they've used as a eponym. So Delta is the Indian variant. And the Indian variant seems to have gone throughout the world now. It's in Australia, it is in the continental United States, it is in Europe. So we know that it is spreading, and it's much more transmissible. According to my contacts in Singapore, it's about almost 100% more transmissible than the other variant, which would be the Alpha. And I also think that it's becoming a different type of infection. It seems to affect people a little differently than what we were seeing before. I just had a research study that was done, a prospective research study done in Britain, and they're finding that there is some change in the white matter in the brain on MRI examination. So people that have had COVID are having some neurological impairment, and it seems to be the new variant may be doing more of that. It's definitely not as deadly. We're not seeing people being admitted to hospital and dying, but we definitely see people being infected, and we also see governments, in particular California state government, has now reenacted the mask law for indoor use. Outdoor is still without mask, indoor is with mask. And we're seeing also some talk about going into another lockdown in California. The mayor of New York City says there will not be a lockdown if there's continuation of spread. So there's a lot of concern that things are moving in a different direction than had been anticipated with the vaccine rollout. The vaccine rollout was spoken about by Dr. Gottlieb, who was an FDA commissioner prior to COVID and the pandemic, but then he was hired as a spokesperson through a press agency, and he's also on the board of Pfizer. And he was on television the other night talking about that 300 million people had been vaccinated in the U.S., which is incorrect. Then he did not correct his statement, said there were 300 million doses, but he did say 300 million people. That is not correct. There are about 179 million people that have had vaccine, either Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson. AstraZeneca, I am not aware of being available in the United States for vaccination. I know that it's available. The government does have it, but I've not seen it in the state of Florida being used, and we do not have it in our office, although we have the other three. Now, the vaccine scenario goes back and forth. There is talk that it does work against the variants, and then there's talk that it doesn't. There's evidence that the Moderna vaccine has an impact on the variant from India, which is the Delta, and then the Janssen, which is Johnson & Johnson, does not, or has not borne out that evidence yet. So that's one component. The second component are the expectations of the fall. Now, Dr. Gottlieb mentioned there would be an increase in certain states that had failed to vaccinate the majority of the population. He's in Connecticut. He states that 80% of the folks in Connecticut have been vaccinated, so he does not see an anticipatory increase in infection and increase in transmission throughout the state in the fall, although he does anticipate up to 10 to 20% increase in certain states that have not met that mandate, which would be Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, and a few other states. Now, we don't know what any of this is going to look like in the fall because we have flu. Now, people were wearing masks during COVID, and they were preventing flu transmission. There's no question that flu transmission was kept at bay because of the masks, and we know that, and also from limited travel. So people were not traveling on airplanes. They were not moving about like they normally do globally. And then they were having masks as a protective surface against transmission of spittle and other aspects that when people cough, sneeze, or wipe their nose, those kinds of things were not happening as frequently, of course. So they do happen, but the masks were being used pretty effectively to prevent the flu transmission. And we didn't see much. And I can tell you that from my perspective here in Miami Beach, we did not see flu throughout the period of time that we typically do, which is November through April. That's normally our flu season. So that's an interesting situation to consider, that in the fall, there's going to be probably a new variant. We have the Delta Plus, and there's going to be other Greek alphabet letters that will be used, gamma, epsilon, who knows what, that will be ascribed to these new variants. Then we're going to have the flu, and then we're going to have the common cold, which is coronavirus as well. So we have COVID, which is SARS-CoV-1 / SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID-19. So there's two types of COVID, and essentially SARS-CoV-1, which was 2004. So that we do not have. SARS-CoV-2 we do have, which is very similar to SARS-CoV-1. And I want to reiterate, we did have a similar type of infection. It was much more transmissible and more deadly, and that was 2004. So the 2019 version, SARS-CoV-2, will be competing with the normal common cold, which is the coronavirus, and there's different subtypes of that, and then influenza. Now, to add on to that, so we've got that sort of little nugget, and then we have H10N3, which is bird flu, avian flu, that has been actually recently diagnosed in a patient in China. So that could also add intrigue into the whole situation. So you have SARS-CoV-2, which is like SARS-CoV-1, just not as lethal. You have coronavirus subtypes, which make the common cold. You have influenza, which is a virus that causes flu. Then you have the avian flu as well. So we have a perfect storm for the fall. Now, going back to the vaccine. So you have multiple vaccines, and I think most people understand The vaccines are not foolproof. They're used only to mitigate certain symptoms. You still can get sick. You can still transmit it. It just reduces the impact of the illness on the person who has had the vaccine. The vaccines do have side effects. There are no question. I've seen the side effects. I've had people experience side effects. I've seen a case of Bell's palsy. I've seen a case of severe headache. I spoke to a gentleman that had severe ocular migraine. And I've had other people that have had just a variety of different, either from weakness, fatigue, lethargy to other things, but they pass. Now, the long term, those are the early phase, if you will, side effects. The long-term side effects, or the long-term question of whether or not the vaccines are safe, is not been borne out. We do not know what that looks like. We have animal studies that show different parameters that could occur. There's no question people have died from the vaccine. There's no question that there is censorship going on in mainstream media and social media that prevent doctors from speaking about what they've seen, side effects, problems, etc. So I'm not going to get into that. That's real. There are people that have died. I don't think that we know exactly the number. The VAERS system, which is a reporting system, is very difficult to use to determine the actual cause of certain issues with vaccines. There's some question that they don't even recognize a causal link. They just mention that, hey, if you've had the vaccine within a week or two and you've had a symptom or some sort of side effect, that you can report it, but there's not any, I would say, standard operating procedure that gives feedback to us as physicians on that information. It's very hard, again, to isolate and to correlate. So many people are making many assumptions, and I don't think that that's correct. And I also don't think that our government bureaucrats, whether it be the CDC or the NIH or Dr. Fauci or whomever, are being as honest and as forthright as they could be. And of course, we all know that. So moving from that point to the next point, which is, what are the potential things that you can do right now to protect yourself and your loved ones from the continuation of the pandemic? And again, this has been said before, but taking vitamin D, usually 2,000 to 4,000 international units a day for an adult. That's a reasonable amount. And the reason is vitamin D is converted in the fat of the skin. So the fat or lipid layer of skin, which is an oily layer on top of your epidermis, the actual transmission of cholecalciferol to its active form, which is vitamin D, occurs under UV radiation, sunlight, and it's converted in that lipid layer. Well, if you go into the sun and you get exposed to sunlight, immediately what do you do after that? Well, if you've come from the beach or the pool or working out outside, you take a shower. So you remove that lipid layer and you remove the ability for you to convert vitamin D. So nobody really has talked about that I've heard. So that's something to consider. If you're going to get vitamin D, at least for 6 to 10 hours after you've been exposed to the sun, do not wash your skin. Don't take a shower. Don't hose off. Don't scrub. Don't use soap. Just leave it. Leave the skin alone and don't touch it. Let your vitamin D convert, and that's how you get it. Otherwise, you're going to have to take vitamin D, as I just stated, in its oral form. Number 2, vitamin C. Vitamin C, ascorbic acid, helps white blood cells make lysozyme. It's an antioxidant. It helps collagen rebuild itself. It's super important. Take at least 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day. And that's not going to do anything but help you. Third thing, if you want to be very proactive, take your trace elements, take a good multivitamin, get your zinc, your molybdenum, your chromium, your selenium, get all that. Get your trace elements, get the things that you need for your immune system. There's absolutely no reason why you can't do that. And in our office, we have a very good multivitamin that we sell. But if you're interested in knowing more about that, let us know. The other thing you can do is rest. Sleep is super important, and people are really not sleeping so well these days, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Most of it comes from behavioral issues, but people are just staying up later or looking at their texts and making phone calls on computer, watching TV. So try to limit that. Try to get your rest. Try to sleep 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a night so you can get your REM sleep. If you work in the evening, try to nap during the day. But get your sleep. That's how you heal, and that's how your immune system stays robust. The other things that you can do IV therapy with vitamin C. You can get B12 shots. You can do these ancillary things. And if you have availability to that, I think that's also helpful. Now, wearing a mask, that's a good question. People are still wearing their mask. I've seen people wear 2 masks outside, and I just don't understand that. But I think if you're going to be inside and anybody around you is new or unknown and you're uncomfortable, wear a mask. It's not going to hurt you to wear a mask. And the only reason I say that is because it's not so much protecting the airway coming in, it's really for protecting the airway going out, but there is some protection from breathing in particulate. And as I've mentioned before too, the virus does not live in the air. It lives on static items, for instance, dust, which has a covalent bond that it's formed with the virus, and that's how it gets into your system. So yes, the virus goes through most any fabric, but if it's attached to a dust particle, that dust particle may be blocked from breathing in. I'm not a fan of masks in general, but if you feel uncomfortable and you're not sure what to do, probably better to wear a mask just for the reasons that I just explained. If you're sick, you shouldn't be out in public. You should be at home. If you have to go out and you're sick, that's the reason to wear a mask. If you're coughing, you're sneezing, or you have any kind of drippy nose, the mask is going to prevent transmission of spittle, fomites, and other material from your nose and your mouth onto a surface or into the air, which could cause illness. So that's the key. If you keep that in mind, that's a reasonable reason for a mask. The other one is the other reason is not necessarily so effective, but could there be some benefit? Maybe. That's plus minus. For sure, if you're not feeling well or you have some concern about being infected with something and you're coughing or sneezing or making other involuntary respiratory gestures, I think that's what you have to do. Washing hands, of course, not being in close contact with people, that's important. Obviously, people are traveling now. They're on airplanes, buses, trains, whatever. They're going to be around people in close contact. So we're going to see an uptick in illnesses, and we already are seeing that. I'm seeing people come in from New York with colds and viruses. So there's no question we're starting to see illness come back. It's just, nature of how these things work. So I'm going to end it today. I think that's enough. We can get into a lot more detail, but giving you that information and just updating you on things I think is important, and just reinforcing some new ideas and maybe dispelling some myths are important too. So if you want to reach out, 305-672-4733, or you can email clinic@hallongevity.com, HALLONGEVYTY.com. Thank you.